way dropping a quote from Endgame. So, oh, we're using our made up names. So it's Philip Bateman here. Hello. No, anyway, hello Ben. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for coming on, and thank you so much for giving me such three wonderful film choices. One I got confused with another film, which we can go into, and the other two, sorry, are favourites of mine, and one of them is definitely in my top 10 films of all time. So a good chat is about to be had. So yeah, would you like to announce your three films, if that's okay?
All right. So I actually have four, and I'm going to kind of pick the ones which I think are probably going to be the best ones. So
okay.
Yeah. So I had Pump Up the Volume.
That's the mystery one. I was going to go.
Yeah,
What was
absolutely.
the fourth one right there?
Pump Up the Volume is from 1990, Alan Moyle's movie. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, also from 1990. So Tom Stoppard directing his own play from the 60s. And The Babadook, which is a much more recent horror movie, which I absolutely love. And finally, this year's Everything Everywhere All at Once. I think I'm probably gonna skip Pump Up the Volume, because as much as it means quite a lot to me and my teenage self, it's not quite as up to date a choice as the other three. So thematically, I think.
Do you know what? The funny thing is, that is a film that's inspired you from a very long time ago. And honestly, I say never discount the 90s choice. I mean, we can start with, and honestly, Pump Up the Volume. I think Pump Up the Volume and Cuffs, another Christian Slater vehicle, are two of my favorites. So if you want to go back and discuss them, so be it.
All right. Oh, we'll kick it off there then. In that case, Pump Up the Volumes, and it's an Alan Moore's movie. He also did Empire Records.
Yes.
And it wasn't his first movie, but I think he had one of those things where he tried to make a movie, they took it away from him and edited it and cocked it up, and he basically retired from the movie business until this story came along and made him want to make a movie again. He's not quite the name that John Hughes is when it comes to teen angst in the movies, but for me, Pump Up the Volume is right up there with movies like The Breakfast Club or 16 Candles and Pretty in Pink. Other touchstones that aren't Hughes movies might be like Say Anything or Heathers, obviously, is the other touchstone, which again, another Christian Slater movie. The guy he's playing in this, Mark Hunter's a much more introverted, less psychotic version of Slater's JD in Heathers, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Both films deal a little bit with teen suicide and the goings on in high school and that kind of thing. Very much high school movies. Where in Heathers, JD is like the product of trauma. His mum killed herself. His father kind of created this darkly ironic fatalism to deal with it, and he's basically become like a high school shooter kind of thing.
Yes.
In Pump Up the Volume, Mark's much more isolated and alone. He's your typical teen angst, basically, but he creates this pirate radio persona back in 1990 when pirate radio was actually a thing. Yeah. But yeah, Hard Harry or Happy Harry Hard On. A lot of people have said basically that his character in Pump Up the Volume is basically Holden Caulfield in The Catcher in the Rye, but putting on a Lenny Bruce persona.
Brilliant, yeah.
And that's a really good way of thinking about the character and the different expression he gets. Because basically he's completely introverted. He's moved to a new town. He's got no friends, and in high school America, of course, that's just like the kiss of death. He's the guy that sits in the back of the lunchroom and doesn't speak to anybody and sits on the stairs and reads a book and then goes home. His pirate radio persona, Hard Harry or Happy Harry Hard On, is kind of this hypersexualized, half-naked beast speaking through a voice disguise, which makes him sound like a grown-up. Basically, he thinks he's speaking to nobody. He thinks he's acting out these lurid fantasies, ranting, half thinking out loud. He's exercising demons as far as he's concerned. He's getting stuff out there. He's expressing himself to nobody. He doesn't expect anybody to be listening. But these big, massive, hyper-real rants he goes on actually do have an audience, and they find this kind of universality in his very, very specific Mark / Harry musings that he does. What he's got there basically is unfettered freedom to express himself, but precisely because he doesn't think he's being listened to. He's dancing like no one's watching, and of course someone is watching, someone's listening, loads of people are listening, and he doesn't realize this, and of course that creates its own kind of set of angst once he realizes he does have an audience, and that he's actually, I don't think he really gets that he's inspiring people until much later in the movie, but that he's affecting people, he's influencing people, that people are actually listening and making choices as a consequence of what he's saying, and that kind of gives him, that kind of like takes away some of his that expressiveness that he's trying, that way of articulating himself that he's getting out there. And then basically there is a plot to the movie as well, as a kind of a spine to the movie. It's basically the local high school is expelling kids whose grades don't quite come up to snuff, that keeps their grade point average up for the school, which in turn means they can carry on attracting government subsidy, which the principal is funneling half into her own pockets and half boosting the school's prestige and therefore her own prestige out of it. And she gets and they find her out and she gets punished for it, yada yada yada. But that's the spine of the movie. That's basically almost there to give it like the excuse of a 3-act structure, when really this movie could have been just as inspirational, just as interesting, if it had been like 90 minutes or 100 minutes of rants and 100 minutes of ranting, fake masturbation, choice 80s and 90s alternative cuts and phone-in or write-in interactions with people. If it just stayed like that and it was more like an art movie with no real plot, it would have retained the same kind of power, I think.
So what attracted you so much about it? Why at the time of watching it was it such like an influence on you and has stuck with you? Because I'm always interested in the older choices, because, you know, if it's Everything Everywhere All at Once 20 years from now, I'm going to say, okay, fair play. I think it'll probably be there for me as well. But, you know, these old films like Pump Up the Volume, why is it stuck with you for so long?
Well, this is just like, I didn't even know anything really about it when I went to go and see it. I was 15 years old and it was a Sunday afternoon and I went to the pictures on my own. I didn't have much in the way of friends myself at the time, and certainly not people that I'd actually hang out with. I hung out with people at school, but not necessarily after school. I had a younger brother who was cooler than me and I tended to hang out with his friends. So, and one Sunday afternoon, I just had a bit of spare cash, and I decided to take myself to the pictures, and that happened to be what was on. I was 15 years old. It was a 15 movie. I was going to see it on my own, and I kind of like that. And yeah, I just randomly went to see it. I came out of that movie feeling like I was levitating.
Yes.
It was the effect it had on me. Very, very few movies have had that kind of effect on me, that kind of powerful, like almost like out of body experience kind of effect. I think I went to see Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and I had a similar kind of thing where I felt like I was stoned afterwards for about an hour and a half, but just because it was so fucking beautiful. It was like a poem in the form of a film. This was like properly speaking to me, because I actually felt I have no commonality at all with anything that they were talking about. It's high school kids in America in 1990 or whatever, and it's like a 30-year-old man's version of high school kids in America as well. There's the old thing about how these movies aren't being written by teenagers, they're being written by adults for teenagers, kind of thing. But it still felt like that unfettered expression that he had in the movie and the story about how that affected people. I actually responded to that in exactly the same way as his pirate radio listeners did when they were listening to him. The fact that I came from a Christian family, like I said, I didn't have that many friends. I had a few friends at school, but not really close friends. There were friends I talked to about comics and stuff like that. I was the geek who sat there and read books and comics, and didn't have much of an outer life, but a huge inner life, a huge imaginative inner life kind of thing. Because I came from a Christian family and there was not a huge amount of expression that was allowed in that. There's not really a great encouragement to be the person that you want to be. There's an encouragement to be the person that they think that you should be. My dad was the minister, which wasn't just, so I wasn't just a Christian boy. I was a Christian boy whose dad was like, yeah,
On the
exactly.
top, yeah.
Church, he was in church leadership and everything, and people expected me to do what he did. So the additional weight there is that because I was the eldest as well. So of course that means that once again you don't get much of an expression of self there. He was very much a disciplinarian, which meant that it was his way or the highway. He made all the rules. If I brought a book into the house that he didn't approve of, the book disappeared. That kind of thing. I wasn't allowed to watch what I wanted to watch on TV or whatever. It was very much like if Dad is not watching something, then you can watch something, kind of thing. Dad decides what we have for dinner. Dad does this. Dad does that, kind of thing. And that's not to say he didn't love us. Of course he did. But that was the kind of relationship that we had with him. That was the kind of father that he was. It was based on the kind of father that he'd had himself. So
Yeah.
we didn't have much in the way of self-expression when it came to that kind of thing, and that's part of the reason why I think this movie spoke to me so much. Like I said, nothing in common with these kids or the characters these kids were playing or whatever, except that lack of self-expression, that frustration, and not being able to be who you wanted to be and to say who you were, or at least to really find out, not really know how to express it, kind of thing.
And I think as well, like Christian Slater's character being able to express his authentic self with a veil of anonymity, but then getting to a point in the film where he has to make a choice, and he does have to. Sorry, spoilers. If anyone's listening to this podcast, there's going to be spoilers. That he has to reveal that he is, Harry, and just having that sense of that. I don't know, showing up for himself, being accountable, wanting to be free, wanting to be able to have that absolute authentic self freedom of expression. And by the end of the film, being able to marry it together and actually being able to actualize it into his real life. And, the surprise, it's a coming of age film. It's almost that like the reverse when a lot of these teen comedies or teen films of the time with the, I'm going to do this with the old speech bubbles here. The ugly girl suddenly becoming beautiful in the prom. His sort of coming out party was his true self, his true personality, his ability to be everything he wanted to be, the sexualized version of himself, what he believed to be a popular version of himself, the outspoken side of himself, the truthful version of himself, and able to pinpoint hypocrisy and evil going on in the world and able to bring it to light as well.
Absolutely,
but in his own way.
Yeah, it's a really you raised the point about when he was forced to abandon his anonymity, basically abandon the persona he'd been using.
Yes.
He'd actually abandoned the persona itself, the Lenny Bruce style I don't give a fuck kind of persona earlier on, when he found out exactly that he was actually influencing. He started talking much more personally, but the key thing is he was still using the name and he was still using the voice disguiser, which almost incidentally made him sound like his voice was a couple of octaves lower, made him sound like he was an adult. So they almost like this persona that it was already an adult, able to make his own choices, the persona that maybe he might want to become or might not, kind of thing. This hyper real persona came across as an adult when he's on the run and he's having to jump into the back of the van and everything, and it had this whole big silly car chase from the FCA and the police who are coming to shut down this pirate radio, who they think have been responsible for this this kid's suicide. And when they're finally, basically it's the whole parent police state cracking down on the individualism and that kind of thing. That's how it's presented anyway. When that's happening and the voice disguiser breaks, you have this moment where he needs to speak to the kids who are because they're all waiting for him to say something, and he knows this is the last chance he's going to get caught. He needs to speak to them, but his voice disguiser does, and you see this moment of hesitation where he's like, he very nearly doesn't do it because it would mean using his voice, and it would mean being himself, and he does it anyway in the knowledge that it's going to get him caught. He comes out as himself, and he talks to them for the first time as himself, as Mark, in Mark's voice, explaining for the first time that he is just one of them. He's not like this guru figure, if you like.
Yeah.
He's got exactly the same problems that they do, but he's chosen to express himself like that, and he gets caught. The last thing he says to them before the power gets cut is just talk hard.
Yeah.
And then He gets caught. He and his girlfriend get arrested. We never see exactly what happens to him after that. But the final coda, of course, as the credits are going up, is all the different kids starting their own pirate radio stations, and they're not copying him. They're not being Lenny Bruce. They're using their own voices, but they're expressing themselves for the first time. They found a channel and an outlet to express themselves for the first time, which of course is not a literal thing. Go out there and start your own pirate radio show. It's or podcast or whatever. It's a metaphor. They found their voices.
I just think in a way it sort of speaks to me like the death of ego, and also as well a true sense of completion and giving that it's like, whereas some people, you could say a journey to that would be to become the king, to become the hero, but his ultimate thing is almost a sacrifice, but a sacrifice of self, in a sense that he gives that power to everyone, which in turn makes him that much more powerful. So there's a lovely sort of parable, sort of not parable, what's the word I'm thinking, a fable like story there, that a story for all time. He becomes stronger in the fact that he is it's almost like, I'm sorry, I'm going to go to one of my favorite films here, like a Tyler Durden style character, that it's not actually about Tyler Durden, it's about what Tyler Durden represents and true freedom. And I got a lot of similarities between actually Pump Up the Volume and when I saw Fight Club as well. That sense of maybe Fight Club's a little bit more fascist, so a lot more fascist, so we shouldn't go down that road. But the idea of being able to actualize yourself and being true to yourself as well.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely, yeah. And I think where Tyler Durden is almost like this kind of almost like an antisocial version of doing that. This kind of toxic persona that gets created, but it's the narrator's way of expressing who he really is, even if he doesn't actually understand what he's doing at the time. It's a very similar kind of self-actualization thing where I guess the action is still the same, the effect is different, because Tyler Durden isn't really being responsible for other people. he's setting off fireworks in a crowded theatre and then standing there and sitting to watch what happens, kind of thing.
Exactly that. Whereas, like I say, I think with Pump Up the Volume, it's creating this persona, someone that people want to follow, but ultimately saying, I'm nothing, I'm just something you followed, but actually what you're following is your want to have freedom of choice and freedom of expression, and that's in you already. You don't need to follow me to get that. So it's a very powerful message in that film, really.
I think so, absolutely, yeah. I mean, but at the end of the day, Tyler Durden's got 1,001 different slogans and 1,001 different manifestos. He's got so many, it's almost like they're multiple personalities. Whereas Mark has got a two-word thing he says at the end. He says, "Talk hard."
Exactly.
It's what he wants. He wants you to express yourself, and he wants you to do it to the best that you possibly can do.
Whereas the other film is more about expressing what Tyler Durden wants you to and blowing things up. But anyway, another time for Project Mayhem. That's not one of your choices. Where would you like to go next, mate?
Let's get straight into, from the same year, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead.
A film that I have to hold my hands up. I completely confused it with Plunkett and McLean, which is another film we will not be talking about today. But I took this in the other day. I actually own Hamlet, the Kenneth Branagh version, which I will be watching in the next couple of days. I wouldn't say I was confused by it, but I adored it. I love the wordplay, and it's just really nice to see a really young Gary Oldman and Tim Roth.
I know, right?
Just absolutely chewing up the scenery and stuff. So Anyway, sorry. So why is such an amazing film?
Well, I've got to preface this by saying that for all the choices that I've got here are motivational, inspirational in and of themselves, purely because they are such great bloody pieces of art. I mean, even Pump Up the Volume, it's a great teen movie, is a great piece of art.
Yes.
And this is a piece of art because it's an adaptation of a play that Tom Stoppard originally wrote like a quarter of a century earlier. I think it's 1966 was the first performance that was happening, and he ended up writing and then directing the film version, the only film he's ever directed. I think largely because he didn't really trust somebody else to get it right, which I think It's
Fair
fair
play.
enough.
Yeah.
If you go online and you read any reviews of this movie, you can see they've pretty much all of them have got it completely the wrong idea about the movie, unless they happen to have been into the play first themselves, and then they might
Right.
possibly have a better handle on it. But almost all of them have got largely wildly wrong idea about the movie.
What did they say? Because I'm not one for reading many reviews these days, actually.
I thought I'd gin up on it just to see what people have been saying
Hmm.
about it when it was first released, and they're talking about it basically as though the plot of the movie actually was the plot of the movie, which I think is
Ah,
the cardinal mistake you make when you're dealing with something, which in this case is a film adaptation of the Theatre of the Absurd, which was a movie
yes.
at the time, but back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, especially 50s and early 60s. I think Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead was one of the later expressions of that. But you're talking about stuff like Waiting for Godot and that
Hmm.
kind of thing, which has got a lot of touchstones that are in parallel with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead. What you got basically is you got Shakespeare's Hamlet, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are two side characters in Hamlet that exist purely to drive one very minor plot, which
Hmm.
is they went to university with Hamlet. They were two old school friends of his. They haven't seen him for years. Hamlet himself is possibly may or may not be going mad, but his the king, his uncle, has basically is worried that Hamlet may be going mad, or that may have figured out that in order to become king, he murdered Hamlet's father and married his mother to cement his claim to the throne. So he's worried that Hamlet might have figured it out, and he's also worried that Hamlet might be going crazy. Either way, he may be a threat to him. So what he's done is he's called, he's summoned the guy's two best friends from university to come and speak to him, and basically to be spies for him, to try and get him when his guard's down, when he's talking to his two old friends, and try and
Yes.
figure out what's going on with him, and then report back to him. So straight away, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are in the pay of Hamlet's worst enemy. They are not his friends, and the scenes between them in Hamlet the play are very much, we know this because we've seen them having the talk with Claudius the king before they speak to Hamlet. We know, dramatic irony, they're not to be trusted. Hamlet doesn't trust anybody. So straight away, when two guys appear like this, he's on his guard, and he's very, very smart. He's completely correct to be on his guard there, because his old friends cannot be trusted. So the whole conversation between the two of them is it's like carefully feeling each other out kind of thing. He's trying to
Hmm.
he wants to make sure he's not being paranoid about them. He pretty much figures out, because they're not very that great at lying, that he absolutely is right, that they can't be trusted. And then basically, after that happens, the king decides he's going to send Hamlet with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to England with a letter for the English king. The English king has got the letter saying, when Hamlet arrives, kill this man. So basically, Hamlet's going to his death. Hamlet figures out on the voyage to England. He figures out what it is. He breaks open the letter. He reads it. He rewrites the letter to say, "Kill these two." I think Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Jumps off the ship. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern arrive at England, hand the letter over to the English king, and then they're executed, because they think that's what the king of Denmark wants them to do. And that's the literal limit of the interaction that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have with this play. They are literally there to provide this subplot. They act as confirmation, in effect, for Hamlet, that Claudius wants him dead,
Wants
and
me
that
dead.
therefore he's now free to act himself, because Claudius makes that final move to have him executed. So they're pieces in the plot. Basically, they're not really characters. They don't have agency of their own. They don't have plots of their own. They don't have any backstory really, apart from that relationship with Hamlet. What Stoppard does here is he creates a narrative, not a story, because there is no story to this movie that exists outside of the plot of Hamlet itself.
Yes.
But he creates this narrative where Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are the protagonists. But unlike, for example, a novel like The Mad Woman in the Attic, which riffs on a minor character from Jane Eyre, the Mr. Rochester's wife, who's crazy and is been imprisoned up in the attic, and it's her story. And
Hmm.
then the writer of that story creates this backstory and expands and embellishes on that. Or say like Rogue One with the original Star Wars.
Yeah. Yeah.
which expands on the desperate acts required to get the Death Star plans to the Rebel Alliance, and it creates this backstory of what happened there and the sacrifices that were made to get those plans into Leia's hands, and therefore to get the Death Star destroyed, kind of thing. So those things that actually expand on it, and they create their own story based out of like small side characters or plots that weren't really expanded on in the original.
Yes.
Stoppard isn't interested in doing that. He's not interested in giving Rosencrantz and Guildenstern backstories. They don't know who they are. Their last memory, the film starts with them on their way to Elsinore to meet up with Claudius, but they don't know why they're there. They don't remember. They have to piece it together. At one point in the first 10 minutes, one of them asks the other, what's the last thing you remember?
Yeah.
And the last thing they eventually figure out, the last thing they remember was being woken up that morning by the summons from the king. They don't remember anything before then. And crucially, they don't know which one they are. They know their names are Rosencrantz and Guildenstern because that's what they heard the messenger shouting for them. But they don't know which one of them is Rosencrantz, and they don't know which one of them is Guildenstern. And neither does anyone else in the play. Than anyone else in the film. They're addressed by name, and then the next person will address them by name, but they will address the other one by the other person's name, and so they still don't know who they are. They know that they are these two people. As I think Tim Roth's character, who we think may be Guildenstern but probably isn't, we don't know. But Tim Roth's character says like they have choice now, but no options. As in, like, they've had it narrowed down to two people, but that doesn't help. They could be anybody. They are not. They are these two people, but they're just not sure which one.
And I think the thing that really left out me with it was such a wonderful, very Shakespearean as well, that play of language and metaphor and just repetition. Also, there's a wonderful piece in it as well where they basically see the end of Hamlet and what the play of Hamlet is about enacted in mime in front of them. And it's just such an incredible play. It's almost riffing on, they can see the strings on which they are being pulled on, if that makes sense. They're aware it's like, the best way I could liken it is like, it's almost like an NPC character in a video game getting a little, but understanding that it can only walk up and down this one street by itself, but that's what they are designed to do. And I love that they're almost fools in within the story, but they have a greater understanding of themselves and understand, well, this is our sort of lot in our existence, not even in our lives, our existence. Because there's a wonderful scene with Gary Oldman where he's really sort of summing up what his death will be, but there was nothing before and there'll be nothing after. It's just having that moment now and having that condition to fulfill that makes their existence needed, which is so it's a great film, actually. I loved it, but at first I was like, what have you swerved me onto here? It was very, very interesting for the first half an hour, but then I sort of got into it. I was like, oh, I sort of get it. It's very, and Richard Dreyfuss's character and stuff as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely fantastic. Dreyfuss himself, I mean, Gary Oldman and Tim Roth are fantastic in this movie. Ian Glenn, who was
it's Hamlet.
Yeah, as Hamlet, he's fantastic too. He's the last scene in Game of Thrones playing Jorah Mormont. But a very young version of him as well, playing Hamlet, absolutely fantastic. The whole cast are brilliant. The guy, I can't remember the guy who plays Polonius in it, but he's brilliant too. But Dreyfuss in particular, he plays the leader of this company of actors, the player, basically he's called. He's like the artistic director, the producer, the lead actor, the director, you name it, the guy who runs the theatre company. It stems back from a plot line in Hamlet, where Hamlet sets up essentially a play which replays the murder of his father by his uncle. Precisely so that he wants his uncle to watch this play and recognize his own culpability and his own criminal act in it, because he wants to see the guy's reaction. He doesn't have a reaction. He knows he's wrong, because part of Hamlet's indecision here that prevents him from taking any action is that, what if he's wrong? What if he's being paranoid? He knows he's grieving. He knows he's bereaved. He loved his father so much. What if he's wrong? And that's where his indecision comes from. And that's why he's acting so crazy, because he's so conflicted. He is sure, but what if he's wrong? So he sets up this whole play within a play thing, where within the play, that everyone's watching, Hamlet itself. There is a further play which the characters are watching, and of course this is a film adaptation of that play,
Yeah.
where the actors in the play are also characters in the movie. So you have this play within a play within a play. It's one of the first times, because it's a very it's a very theatrical. It very much looks like it's a play that's been adapted into a movie. There's
Yes.
an awful lot of characters standing very still, talking to each other. But this is one of the only moments where the Sopar gets genuinely cinematic, because he has the camera tricks that pull back, and you're watching the puppets do the mime, and then it pulls back, and you're watching Claudius watching it as Hamlet watches it, as Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are watching Hamlet watching it, as we're watching them watching it, and it's like this whole meta kind of layering that goes into it, which is very, very clever, because the whole film, as you've pointed out, is extraordinarily clever, very witty. The wordplay that's going on is easily the match of Shakespeare's own wordplay in his blank verse and everything. And it's very funny as well, purely on the basis that it's I think it's brilliantly odd and oddly brilliant, this movie. It's really, really strange. But I mean, the thing about it is it is fundamentally still, despite it being an adaptation of the play, it's fundamentally the theatre of the absurd. The whole point is that the dramas and narratives in this style are very much existentialist and almost like fatalistic. Nothing matters. That's why there's no plot to this movie, because he didn't want to create backstory for these two characters and flesh them out. The whole point was they didn't have any, and in this movie they don't have any. They don't know who they are. They don't know why they're there. They're wandering through these scenes in Hamlet. They're observing the scenes that they're not in. They're kind of eavesdropping on them, and still they've stepped into a drama that was happening before they got there, and they don't know these people. They don't have any memory, so they're told they're old school friends of Hamlet's, but they don't remember. So they're having to cautiously pick their way through that conversation. So that whole conversation between Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and Hamlet takes on even greater careful picking around, because in this version they're not just trying to figure out where the others stand. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are trying to figure out who on earth this guy is and why they've been asked to be there in the first place. It's an extra, once again, another meta layer into the a very familiar scene. The reason why I love this so much, aside from the fact that clearly it's obviously brilliant, is I find it incredibly inspiring. It's an absurdist drama with the trappings of dream logic. The story is whatever the players in it decide it's going to be. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are trying to carve out a role for themselves, but basically they're finding that Hamlet's story, which has been set in stone for centuries, has them by the hair and it won't let them go. They're never going to be the protagonists of their own story, because they were never designed to be a protagonist of their own story. It's the perfect encapsulation of a theatre of the absurd within a narrative itself. And normally a theatre of the absurd is basically just people sitting in a room talking nonsense to each other for an hour and a half. This is the same thing, but the spine of it is that they were never going to have that kind of protagonist thing. They were never going to be the main characters of their own story. They were never designed to be. And there's this whole school of motivational thought that says that we are the protagonists of our own stories. But that's only true if we're not connected to anyone else's stories, because obviously we can't be the main character of somebody else's story. That would be weird.
Unless you're Tyler Durden.
Yeah, well, he very much wants to be the main character of everyone else's story. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's true.
My own obsession is with narrative and storytelling, the idea that we're all storytellers, that everything that we are and everything we do, every way we express ourselves in the world is basically a story of some kind. It's us unspooling a narrative kind of thing. And I think sometimes we do have to reconcile ourselves to being bit players in someone else's story, because if we were to assert ourselves as protagonists, it would be insensitive or even violent. It would definitely be not well received. And sometimes it's not just for other people as well. Sometimes it's actually better for us to accept the role of side plots or side character, because it allows us to interrelate with other people's stories. It allows us to insisting on foregrounding ourselves isn't a helpful way to navigate life, basically. And we create spaces between ourselves where our stories interact with other people's stories. And I think sometimes we can assert ourselves into those spaces and try and claim them, rather than allowing that space to develop between people. I've always thought that this particular kind of theatre of the absurd thing is a perfect encapsulation of the ultimate complete absurdity in trying to assert yourself as the main character in anything.
Yes.
I think when you're telling your own story, you can actually absolutely tell it from your perspective. But when you're living your story, you need to be aware of how other people are living their stories. And at some point, you have to let go a little bit. You have to create relationships and allow those spaces between people
Yeah.
to develop like that.
And I guess for me, the thing that I got from it as well is understand it, pretty much what you just said there, understanding your place in the universe and understanding that it may not be the biggest part by that subjective opinion, but that is for you, that is enough, that is your role. That is you are the player to that level in that part. And it's still a valid part, but that can sometimes be all it is. I just think the way, they make some very pertinent comments about the nature of time and purpose that I really sort of riffed with me and stuff as well. But exactly what you said there, making the relationships and allowing for space in between relationships as well, and understand that you can't force anything in this world. That understand that just play your part as well as you can.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. And whenever I think about that, whenever I think about how we create those stories between amongst ourselves, and I think about that a lot because, like I said, obsessed with storytelling.
Yes.
I always think about this film. I always think about how I feel every time I read how great it is to watch it, how interesting, how funny it is, how every other line makes you think or has one or two different meanings, kind of thing.
Yes.
Even more so when you're familiar with the story of Hamlet, because when you go back and watch it again in that sense, you can see all the different layering that's going on, the cleverness involved. But the way it's telling stories and the way it's telling you that their story doesn't matter because they were never designed in this story. This is Hamlet's story. This is a primal story. This story has been unchanged for centuries. They were always gonna be orbiting that story.
Yes. Yes.
The gravity of the story has got them basically by the short and curlies. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, no, I just have to thank you for introducing us to that one. And people, if you haven't seen it, you should really check it out because it's a wonderful film that has a beautiful knowledge, like a Shakespeare play, like a knowledge of language, but it's not arrogant about it. It's not in love with itself. Everything has a meaning, and like you say, every sentence in it has a lovely play to it. And I will be watching it again because there's a
Yeah,
lovely reward to watching, see how they move around it and stuff, and like navigate their way through this
absolutely.
sort of universe they've found themselves in.
Yeah, I mean, you can talk about how clever it is to the cows come home, but fundamentally, it's incredibly playful, like you were saying. It's just,
Yeah.
it's not in love with the sound of its own voice. It just wants to talk because it really wants to tell you the story. It's just not a story you think it's going to be.
As all good art should be.
Yeah.
Well, all right then. So, what's the next one? I'm interested to see where we're going to go next.
Right. Coming a bit more up to date now, The Babadook. It's a relatively
Please,
recent movie. It's 5 years old, 2017.
we're going
Um,
chronological. I like it. I get this.
it wasn't designed to, but I think
No,
yeah,
but this is the way we've gone. I love
yeah.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this is a horror movie. I'm a horror writer. I love horror movies. For a while, we've talked about this in the past, how I went off horror movies for ages because I got really bored with the whole um, torture porn, gore porn thing.
Yeah.
That for ages that was pretty much all anyone was making, and I found it really personally disappointing. I found it philosophically completely bereft. A couple of exceptions like
Mm.
Martyrs and that kind of thing, but fundamentally. It wasn't saying anything to me. In fact, what it was saying was something that I actually despised. That put me off horror for ages. But I've been getting back into it over the last few years, and The Babadook was one of those movies that really spoke to me.
Mm.
So basically, you've got a lady who's bringing up her 6-year-old son. Amelia's bringing up 6-year-old Sam on her own after her husband Oscar was killed in an accident while they were on the way to the hospital. She was in labour with Sam, and they had an accident, and her husband was killed. So basically, Sam's birth has coincided with the death of her husband. Sam's never known him. He's only ever known his mum on her own, grieving a man he's never met, which if you think about the psychic fallout when that's massive. And the fact that the accident that killed him was while on the way to get to death for him being born, kind of thing.
Yes.
So he's 6 years old. He begins displaying erratic behavior. He's insomniac. He's preoccupied with this supposedly imaginary monster, which he's built weapons to fight and everything. And one night, he asks his mum to read this pop-up storybook kind of thing, this like kids book called Mr. Babadook, and it's a story about this creature, a tall, pale-skinned figure in a top hat with kind of claws for fingers.
Yeah.
And anyone that becomes aware of the Babadook then gets tortured and tormented by it. It's not the kind of book you would expect to be made into a kid's book. It's clearly not. It's a horror narrative, so straight away we expect certain things, and as soon as this happens, horror tropes ring in your head like bells, and you know that this is not just a book, and this is it's named after the movie. You know that this figure is going to be in there somewhere. And then the usual strange things start happening, poltergeist style behaviors, the doors open and close or by their own strange noises. I think she finds glass in her food and that kind of thing. And
yeah, I forgot. Yeah.
and I think that the beautiful thing about this movie, and the beautiful thing about the way it's set up is that it's got all the tropes of demonic possession movies, like there's demons in the house, The Conjuring, that kind of thing. It's got all the tropes of a poltergeist movie where there's a spirit in the house, and there's a bereavement here, and there's almost like the ghost of a dead father haunts, or husband haunts this movie. Anyway, Oscar's ghost haunts this movie, and he's never actually in it really.
No.
So yeah, is it a possession? Is it a poltergeist? Or is it in her head? Because
Madness. Yeah.
an awful,
Yeah.
an awful lot of the narrative of this movie is very, very concerned with asking you to step aside from your horror tropes and imagining what if this is all in her head. At some
Yeah.
point, is she actually hallucinating a lot of this stuff? Has she put the glass in her own food? These noises, are they actually in her head? Because it's a typical horror movie thing. She's there the kids asleep. She's there on her own in the house. Is she actually hearing things, or is she hearing things? Um, so it could easily be the fact that stress and grief is finally making her lose it. The hallucinations could fall into any of those categories: possession, poltergeist, or madness. And the thing is, the beautiful thing about it is the film itself never really commits to any one single one of those three readings. You can read it as a simple horror story, and it kicks ass as a simple horror story, or you can read it as an allegory for bereavement and grief and madness from trauma, and you could be right either time.
Yeah.
There's no thing where believing one interpretation kind of like negates the others, because they're all equally valid, which is a very beautiful way of putting the story together. I really appreciate the storytelling that allows the audience the space to do that, without you don't have to have an argument with it. You can accept that any one of those things can be true. And the ending of the movie, where the Babadook asserts itself as a force in the house, and it's that big crescendo style thing you get at the end of horror movies, where all the creeping about is done with, and suddenly you're faced with the thing itself, kind of thing. But the end of the movie doesn't see the Babadook exorcised. It isn't destroyed. There isn't some Father Merrin figure with a Bible standing in the background. There's no like backstory explained where they find out where this book has come from or anything, and therefore how to destroy it, kind of thing. If you find this talisman is the only thing that can defeat it, there's nothing like that happens. There's no fantasy narrative going on here, where Nightmare on Elm Street style, where they go into the backstory and how to defeat it, kind of thing. She stands up to it. She roars back at it. It retreats from her. It's not exactly tamed, because after that. It lives in the basement.
Yeah.
It's no longer there's this whole stalker abuser dynamic which happens in horror movies. The bad guy, the villain, the poltergeist, the demon, whatever it might be, has this stalker abuser mentality. They're coming in, they're inflicting themselves on a stable, and causing the stable to become unstable, the familiar to become unfamiliar, destabilizing a family or a life, or whatever it might be, or a town, whatever it might be. That's what the Babadook is doing throughout, and by the end, it's lost control of this stalker abuser mentality, but it still exists. It's still living in the house. But it's just not in control of that narrative anymore. She's in control of the narrative. She keeps it in the basement, and she feeds it, and she carefully watches it. And at some point, it tries to rise up and shout at her again, and she fronts up to it, and she faces it down. It's because you can't kill grief. and
Mm.
you can't exercise trauma. You can control the narrative that defines how they affect you. You can learn to live with them to an extent. Just don't turn your back on them.
And I think the big through line that I got from thinking back to Babadook and something you've mentioned there, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern as well, is having, for me, really good art is subjective. And even in what it's trying to say, I think if you get a piece of work and it can only be about one thing, then you miss out on all that opportunity for different readings into it. And that's one thing I love about that. I think that's what makes something truly memorable and inspirational and stands the test of time, and also makes you want to come back for repeat viewings as well. That like the same man never steps into the same stream twice, because it's a different man and different water and different stream. But
100%.
and I think it's the same with these films you're explaining as well. When you visit them at a different time in your life, suddenly it will speak to you differently as well, especially with the nature of grief and loss and stuff as well. It's a yeah, and I agree with you entirely what you said about horror as well. When it is just getting into that torture porn phase, and look at this, look how much better special effects have got now. Then it's only really about you're just being faced down by something that's going to make you feel repulsed or not. Whereas when you deal with a film with this just very subtle acting and very subtle musical choices or musical cues, and then not revealing lots about backstory about the monster, it makes it, one of your favorite words here, a lot more uncanny and a lot more scary. Because if you know exactly what's down the bottom of the stairs, it's still bloody scary. But if it's just a dark spot and you're not sure what's down there, that's a lot scarier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the fact that these things are never explained like that. Explaining in so many of these narratives basically means explaining away.
Mm,
One of the ways in which we control fear of things, and the horror movies tend to do this an awful lot. They set up the mysterious figure, and then in Act Two they explain the mysterious figure. They have the characters go off and play amateur detective. They go and look at these library files. They go and
mm,
speak to this guy at the lunatic asylum. They find out the backstory. They have some guy rabbit on it and do all the exposition for 10 minutes. And that the way that we do that is it's a way for the narrative to put the undefined thing that's menacing them into a box.
yes.
This thing is now that thing. We understand that thing, and then the narrative gives them a way to stop it, or to defeat it, or to kill it, or to banish it. And it's a magic talisman, or it's some magic words that it has to listen to, or it's some kind of spell or something like that. Whatever it might
Mm,
be, the narrative almost always gives them a way that their amateur detective work has resulted in. Yes, we finally have a way to defeat the bad guy, kind of thing, because that's what it's come to. It's the shape in the background. Michael Myers was traditionally always called the Shape. Um,
yes.
the shape in the background, this sinister masked figure, who's unknowable, is now known. And once you've defined something, you've set kind of limits around it. You put a kind of a shape around it itself, and you've hemmed it in, and it's no longer scary. That's the part of the point of doing that, is to give the characters the agency to defeat it, which gives you
Mm,
your third act in your resolution in terms of the actual storytelling, but it allows the audience to no longer be scared of it. Um,
yeah.
and to the audience themselves, who spent the first two acts hopefully bricking it at this thing, doing what it's doing and destabilizing stuff, can walk out having achieved some kind of resolution. It moves
Catharsis, yeah.
from dissonance and to resolution, basically. And that's what the majority of mainstream horror movies do. They go from dissonance to resolution. The audience comes out feeling comforted, even if they get this jump scare at the end that means the bad guy's not really, it's gone. They know what the bad guy is now. They know what it is, so
Yeah.
they're not scared anymore. It's been resolved.
And that's a real shame, because I mean, you're right. I know you have a duty of care to the audience, but I sometimes, like I say, if you want something to live on in your mind, you can't have that catharsis at the end. You do need that sort of unanswered question. And I think even if we're not talking about horror here as well, you want films that make you think. You want it to, like, even with like something it does with its imagery or in the script itself, or like I say, even few musical cues and something that will just I love it. I know when I've seen a good film, because there'll be images of it or a certain scene in it that will sit in my head for days. And sometimes I walk out and not even sure if, like you say, that feeling of being a bit punch drunk or a bit sort of like concussed, where you're not aware of what you just saw, but you know you need to go and see it again, or there's just scenes of it or parts of it just keep playing in your head over and over again.
Yeah.
And I really got that with the Babadook. It really sort of spoke to me, not really what the creature was, just the way it had been designed and choices had been made in that way. It skirted the thin line of, is she actually just mad? Are we just, is she an unreliable narrator and we're just seeing it all through her eyes? And I think even at the very end you could still argue it, and that's what I love about it. It inspires debate even past watching it.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely, and that's the reason why that movie is so inspirational to me. And so, and I always think about that movie when I think about the storytelling like this. When I write my own stuff, I don't want to, I don't want to hold the audience's hand too much, or my reader's hand too much. I want to give them something that lives with them for a little while. I don't want them to be able to close the book and instantly forget about it. I don't want them to read the story online and then click to the next tab and the next thing. I want them
Yeah.
to always have a thing in the back of their head, a little niggle where they go back and think about it some more, because it was never properly resolved, and it has more than one thing to it, more than one facet to it that makes them think and compels them to maybe go back and look at it again and read it again. One of those narratives where you can't quite leave it alone, like the space where a tooth used to be. You kind of you keep going back to feeling it and
Picking at it.
yeah, probing it, kind of thing. That's I mean, that's what I want for my own stuff, and that's what I want from this as well. So yeah.
That sounds awesome. Okay, well, while we have a bit of time left, we're going to do the four here. So, everything, everywhere, all at once. At the moment, it is standing in there as one of my top 10 films of all time, which is
Yeah.
a bold thing to stick in there. But please go for it. I think it's incredible.
I mean, it goes without saying, everything everywhere all at once. If you haven't seen that movie, you need to see it. It's on Amazon Prime at the moment. It is a masterpiece. Okay, so
Yes.
I've got no hesitation in saying that it's pretty much a perfect movie. It's an absolute treasure house of a story. So on the face of it, as a story, it's exciting. It's hilarious. It's incredibly moving. It's just a fantastic movie in and of itself. And anyone who watches it completely understands that, because everyone's had exactly the same response to it.
Yeah.
Of the two movies released this year that specifically deal with the idea of a multiverse, this is the one that feels like an event movie.
Yeah.
This feels like a superhero extravaganza. It presses all those buttons that people wanted from like the Marvel movies and stuff like that. By comparison, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness feels like what it is. It's a shallow, deflated, missed opportunity, written unfortunately by a mediocre writer who didn't really get any of the stuff. There's no real imagination behind it. What imagination there is comes from some of the facets of the Sam Raimi's direction.
Yes.
The fact that he's basically trying to polish a turd, but it's compared to that movie, which is very much along the same kind of multiversal thing, using the multiverse as a kicking off point for the story. Everything all at once. It uses that as a springboard, not just a kicking off point, and then it flies off into the air. It's a hugely powerful and emotional story. It makes me want to be a better writer. It makes me want to be a better human being. But it's about a lot of things, this movie. Fundamentally, the way I think about it is that it's about how there are no choices that give us better lives, just different lives. The way
And
multiversal
hot dog
stories
fingers.
and hot dog fingers again, absolutely, yeah.
You
the way
can buy
the,
them
the
now,
way
by the way.
the way these stories always go in these multiversal stories is there's always it's like phrases that we hear all the time these days: living your best life, or living the darkest timeline, the two polar opposites kind of thing. There's the person who's absolutely think their life is so good that they're literally saying that out of all the possible variations of myself across the multiverse, this is the best one. And then there's the darkest timeline one, which is the classic Star Trek style thing that they're having in the sitcom Community, which was basically they had Well, I think it comes from this whole thing where they had they're sitting there in someone's apartment having pizza, waiting for the pizza to arrive, and the pizza arrives and presses the buzzer. So one of the six of them's got to go downstairs, and they roll a dice to see who goes downstairs. And then the episode of this sitcom plays out with each individual strand. It goes down the trousers of time, if you like.
Yeah.
And depending on who goes down to get the pizza, all kinds of different things happen because of the dynamic of who's left in the room, and resolving storylines that have cropped up across the season, kind of thing, and it becomes this whole big thing. And of course, the final one is the darkest timeline, because the person who goes downstairs, everything, but when he comes back upstairs with the pizza, the room's on fire, someone's lost an arm, and it's just like this developed into carnage, basically. That's where this whole darkest timeline thing comes from, the absolute polar opposite of this whole living your best life thing. But we genuinely think this stuff. We think that when life's going badly for us, that we are living in the darkest timeline. We think that when life's going great for us, we're living our best life. Like there are different variations of us across the multiverse,
Yeah.
and this is the one that's happening right now, kind of thing. In reality, that's quantum theory. The whole many worlds hypothesis. There's not actually other worlds out there with people with different people. Well, one guy who was born in Patagonia, one Phil Bedwell who was born a year earlier and was blonde. I mean, there's not all these different variations. One guy who's actually now Jill Bedwell. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not an actual thing that's happening in real life. It's a hypothesis based upon a scientific observation of how quantum theory works. And so, of course, all these great stories have been told about the many worlds hypothesis and different variations and stuff. Jet Li comes in and tries to kill himself a million times over, and in the one was kind of
the one, I remember that. Yeah.
And there are so many of them these days. The multiverse is like there's a multiverse of multiverse storylines, kind of thing. But this one's not concerned with that. This one's only really concerned, as much as the idea of a multiverse gives the protagonist this woman running the laundry with a failing marriage, with no relationship with her kid, who gets told in the movie that she is the worst version of herself across the entire multiverse, and that's the reason why she's been chosen. She's not the chosen one because she's the greatest or the one with the most potential. She's the one who screwed up her own life the worst. She's
Yes.
the literal worst version of this character across the multiverse, and that's why she's been the chosen one. And the whole movie is about her coming to terms with that, and how her life isn't a cavalcade of missed opportunities. Her life is her life. She doesn't get to be other people. She doesn't get to be the superhero. She doesn't get to be the action movie star that she is in a different reality. She runs a laundrette, and her husband loves her.
Yeah.
And her daughter is gay and is depressed, and those two things are not connected. But apart from the fact that her mum is making both those things worse,
Yeah.
and the fact that the movie allows her to come to some kind of resolution. Every single little thing in this movie is gearing towards that. Even when they start to bring in like secondary antagonists to try and attack her in a Matrix style thing, where she's trying to get to her daughter, and all these different guys, people come up and start attacking them. She's achieved this kind of like kind of almost
Neo, like yeah, I'm using the Matrix.
exactly. She's achieved this kind of Neo style thing in a Matrix, where he suddenly becomes like the messianic figure at the end of the Matrix, able to dodge bullets and stuff, and to do impossible things. She's achieved the same kind of thing, not by accessing some kind of weird coding thing or realizing that she's some kind of golden god, but by realizing that all these people that are attacking her are people who need her to be compassionate, who need the same kind of epiphany that she's realized, and she gives it to them. She defeats each one of these secondary antagonists while trying to make it her way up the stairs to her daughter, rather than beating the crap out of them in some martial arts kind of style. She embraces them all.
Yes.
She helps each one of them achieve a similar kind of epiphany to what she's achieved, and she spreads it out like that. She defeats them through love, because that's what she's trying to impart to her daughter, and almost like she helps them to realize the various different iterations of themselves that are attacking her, because they're being possessed by other multiversal versions of themselves and so forth. It's very complicated. But I mean, she gives each one of them peace, or at least gives them the tools and shows them how to find their own peace. She sacrifices elements of herself to do it as well. She takes the time out to do it. It's all slowed down in little micro.
Yeah,
But each one of it is a tiny little individual story of like 10, 20, 30 seconds, which she does and then moves on to the next one. And each one of those is like the encounter with someone on the stairwell. She's not decapitating someone with a katana. She's helping them to achieve peace. And it's
yeah.
beautiful, beautiful movie. There's every single choice in this movie is geared towards that epiphany and what it means to the characters and what it can mean to the audience. Um,
And
it's beautiful.
And the through line I see with like Babadook, I think it's really like you say, having it could be it could have multiple meanings. Definitely the same with everything ever all at once. But a through line through like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern and pump up the volume as well is sort of actualizing the truest version of yourself, and not in a hero's journey sort of way. Understanding that you can be flawed and fail. I always remember Michelle Yeoh's character so much that she was told as well that the reason that her character was so important and was chosen was because she had failed at so many things in that life. But she had the thing that I got from that was, but at least she tried. She may gave up on many different lives, but she tried to do it, and that's what made her so important. And it's like understanding your role in the universe and understanding it might not deemed by someone else to be this massive sort of like ground shaking swell of thing that will change the universe, but to you it will change your own universe. And that's really what I think brought me to absolute floods of tears at the ends of everything ever all at once, that she had found her own personal, she was her own personal savior.
Yeah,
And I think that's what's so important about it as well. She's not saving the universe, she's saving her universe. And
100%, absolutely.
and that's what's gorgeous about it. And yes, so in a weird sort of way with the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, they understood their roles and positions in life. And yeah, Christian Slater understanding that in sort of destroying his own ego, in destroying his own creation, he gives that power to everyone else for them to raise up their own universes as well.
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. That's the thing that you get from everything ever all at once is she is the person who never achieved her potential, that had all these things she could have been and didn't become any of them.
Mm,
But what they do in the end of that movie is this wonderful thing that I love to do with negative stuff in my own life, is to reframe that.
mm,
How can you take being told that and turn it into a positive when it sounds so negative? Well, what it means is that she never became any one thing. She has all that potential. She could be anything
yes.
because she never chose one particular thing. She has all these different interests that she never chose one path. And that's why it's not because she's a failure. It's because she has all this brimming potential. She could touch any one of these possible versions of herself, even ones that she's not supposed to be able to do, kind of thing. That's what makes her the superhero in this movie, is that limitless potential, because she can choose to be anything she wants, and we can all choose to be anything we want, and we don't, when none of us constrained by the person that we've become. We can become somebody else if we choose to. We can choose, make different choices, but that
Mm,
means in order for us to do that, we have to accept the choices that we've made already and what's led us to this place. And the thing that I always think of in situations like this is that um, you can regret an awful lot of stuff in your life. You can regret stuff that's happened to you. You can regret stuff where you've been the person that's happened to somebody else.
mm,
You can say, I wish I'd made different choices. I wish I'd made less harmful choices. I wish I'd known then what I know now. But if you've got anything in your life that you treasure, if you've got anything in your life right now that you love and you care about, the situation you're in, the people that you're with, the family that you've got, whatever it might be, if there's anything in your life right now that you value, that's come about because of all the stuff that's led you to that moment. If you change any of that stuff, you don't have that thing.
mm.
It goes back to another time travel story where we could going back to, we came in with Avengers Endgame, um,
Yeah, we did.
where Tony Stark does not want to do the time heist, and he gets persuaded to do the time heist largely because he's clever enough to figure out how to do it, and after that he can't help himself. But the thing he says is that get everything else back, absolutely, keep what I've got. I need to keep what I've got. he's very, very worried that in going back and changing stuff, he's going to lose this life, this child, this relationship, this marriage that he's got that he doesn't want to lose. And that's what would happen if you were able to go back and change the things that you regret. It's a causal loop. It's a narrative knock-on effect. You change one thing, you change another thing, you change another thing, and suddenly you aren't in the place where you meet this person. Or you are, but you're with somebody else, or you take this job somewhere else, and that leads you on to this job somewhere else, and so you never actually develop those skills that then gets you this opportunity later on, and all those different things can change. If there's anything in your life you value right now, you can regret stuff, but never think about changing it. Never dwell on what might be. Always dwell on what is right now and move forward from there.
Oh, Ben, that's wonderful, mate. That's a beautiful. That is, yeah, such a lovely sentiment, and yeah, completely agree. And what? First of all, well done. You got 4 in where most people only get 3. And I think we covered them all beautifully as well. But yeah, I would say to everyone, little bit of spoilers, but that still doesn't negate the fact that maybe listen to this after you've got to see them. They're going to be on the front of the on the podcast anyway. But I would recommend all 4 of these films super highly. They're all. I love the fact as well. You've got something that's very different genres, each one of them, but they all have that wonderful message about them, and they're all classics in their own right. And also, you've gone quite well through different years as well. So I'm very impressed, mate. Good choices. Good choices.
Thanks, brother.
So that's all right. But before we leave, is there anywhere where people can follow you, or you want them to follow you, or do you just want them to leave you alone? Babadook.
You can find me online anywhere where you got the word Desincarne, Desincarne. That's French for bodiless, because I'm that pretentious. So at Twitter, Instagram, if you want to go to desincarne.com, you can find a few of my short stories. Yeah, I tend to write online under the name Jack Morrell, or you can find me as Jack the Bodiless somewhere else, but I'm just Ben, really.
All of these alter egos. But thank you so much, mate. Well, listen, take care of yourself. It's been an absolute pleasure today. Thank you for this, because yeah, I've loved the choices as well. And as one of the things, selfishly, why I wanted to start this podcast, I get to watch more films, and I love the fact when someone says to me, "Have you seen this?" and I'm like, "No," and then I have a reason and a time frame in which to watch it, so
Nice.
it doesn't stop me putting it on the list. So yeah, thank you, mate. You've given me a few films there that I've enjoyed, and some that I want to go and rewatch now as well.
Oh, pleasure, buddy.
Thanks, mate. All the best, yeah, and I'll see you again soon.
Take care, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye.